And we marvel at seeing their patrol cars, especially when they pass us, so I know they're after somebody else. You also probably love their hats as much as you hate their tickets. They're the UHP, the Utah Highway Patrol Troopers. They've now been around just shy of a century. Craig Worth looks back at their history, and it's definitely worth watching.
This is probably what your grandpa did not want to see in his rearview mirror in 1954. But the Highway Patrol probably didn't want to see your grandpa either, especially in a high-speed pursuit.
Yeah, I don't think that there was too many of them. Because a high-speed pursuit, it would be 70 or 80 miles an hour in this, what the speed limit is today.
We will get back to the classic 54 Ford Trooper car in a moment, because we are driving back long before the 50s. We are driving back 93 years to what was called the State Road Commission Police. The state figured it probably needed over 6 dozen men to keep the 50,000 Utah cars in line in 1923, although they started with about a half dozen. They only got to drive the Model Ts in real bad weather. Otherwise, they had to drive the more economical motorcycles.
In fact, in the early days, they were all on motorcycles. In the cold weather.
Well, they got a snappy uniform, a hat, and a star, and a tradition was born. By the 1930s, the force became the Highway Patrol. And wow, they got Tommy guns. It was the time of Al Capone-type gangsters.
We think of it nowadays and we think, how did those guys do it?
Later, they got what has to be the coolest piece of equipment around. It was the Drunkometer, a bunch of vials and wires and Buck Rogers stuff. If you could figure it out, you're sober.
Yeah.
If you can't figure that out, you're drunk.
Yeah.
Well, lots of stuff has changed. The pride and tradition has not. They live it every day.
We don't use the Drunkometer anymore, which is good. But there's other stuff like the uniform that's pretty special to us. We still wear the wool pants, the wool pink pants. Not very many people still wear that.
Yes, things like speed limits have changed, and the radar units have changed.
Talking to guys back in the day, said that if you stood in front of this, you could feel your badge get warm. That's how much radiation was coming off this thing.
But for decades, the Beehive has not changed. Tradition is important.
It's always been that way. And the employees of the Highway Patrol, they never questioned that. In fact, back in the late 90s, they were actually talking about changing the logo from the Beehive to something else. And it was almost a revolt.
And to remember those who have fallen, their pictures line the halls to remind those who work here at the headquarters.
It's an honor. It really is an honor to be a trooper.
And so it's why they keep a few old cars around and learn the stories of the old days and keep the traditions. And it's why people are fascinated about the hats, the cars, and to know there's just something special about state troopers and about history. Well, it was 1923, and the state legislature felt there were enough cars out there on those old gravel roads that it needed a patrol. And ever since then, the Utah Highway Patrol has been fueled by pride and tradition. Craig Worth, News for Utah.
Now, Lieutenant Royce, you just heard from there in Craig's story. You told Craig that officers in the old ceremonial car have occasionally pulled someone over as they headed to a parade or a car show. That would be embarrassing, getting busted by a trooper in a 60-year-old squad car.